All right, y'all want the long version or the short version?
Long.
No, I'm just kidding.
Long.
So I am going to take y'all down memory lane here and just kind of explain to you how I'm here and why I'm here and why I sell real estate, right? So I have been in the business. Well, let me backtrack. Harrison Williams, Keller Williams Realty. So I started the business about 5 years ago. I started actually out in Franklin. So I grew up in Brentwood. I'm a unicorn, born and raised here in the Middle Tennessee area, and I know a lot of y'all are as well. However, believe it or not, in my line of work, that's really rare. A lot of people get into real estate as a hobby or soccer mom who's picking up a little bit of extra money and so forth. And yet having that market knowledge and knowing different areas of town just through osmosis, because I grew up here, really provides me, a distinct advantage over quite a few other people. So that's why I actually love working with relocations and people moving to our town, because I am super passionate about Nashville and the growth we've seen. And yeah, there's pros and cons to all of it, don't get me wrong. And yet being able to share kind of our culture and what Middle Tennessee's always been about is really fun to talk with people. So started 5 years ago out in Franklin. So in the real estate world, right, we have two types of agents. You've got a buyer's agent on one side of the transaction, and you have a listing agent on the other side of the transaction. So I started exclusively as a buyer's agent, which means I spent an entire year focused only on working with buyers. Phenomenal opportunity, great experience. I got into business when I was 24, so I was genuinely just that golden retriever puppy looking for somebody to take a chance on me and give me an opportunity to spread my wings. So did that for a year, and yet I quickly learned that I was playing the real estate game with one hand tied behind my back because I couldn't represent the other side of the equation. Had a falling out with a gal I was working for, so I decided to go out on my own. Had a successful business as a solo agent for a year and a half, 2 years. And then I was actually approached by my office leadership to be a real estate coach. So I actually spent about 16 months coaching 45 or 50 agents, teaching them how to go from brand new in the business to actually having a sustainable career that is going to pay them. Now, what you may or may not know is National Association of Realtors actually tells us that 4 out of 5 people get out of the real estate business in the first 2 years. So not necessarily right or wrong, but my mentality going into it the whole time was find a way to pay the bills and get through it and survive. And so through my years of coaching and mentoring and so forth, I've had a lot of turnover from different agents and so forth. And quite frankly, that's why I left that role as a real estate coach, because I was pouring into agents' lives, and yet at the end of the day, I got home and my wife and I had a conversation, and I was spending more time and making less money because it was a revolving door and these agents were coming and going. Was presented with an opportunity to launch a division of a real estate team up here in Hendersonville. Wife and I found out we were pregnant, so little man's about 15 months, so we moved up here a little over a year ago, and I launched a division of a team here. So my role is really threefold. So if you've has anybody ever run a 3-legged race? You know what that's like? Like
the
field day,
yeah,
3-legged race, right? So that's essentially what I do every day, right? So my 3 legs are recruit talented agents. So I'm always on the lookout for other people to be in business with. Like anything and any component or business in life, it's all about the people you're in business with. Secondly, so I do still help people buy, sell, and invest in real estate. So that's leg number 2. And then the third leg is that I coach, train, and mentor the agents that I currently have under my team. So I've got 8 agents that currently work with me currently. We help individuals buy, sell, and invest, as we mentioned. So there is no better time than the present for people. A lot of people's gears are starting to spin. You're probably seeing it as you're out driving in your neighborhoods. There's a lot more signs in yards and a lot more people active. That's common. There's seasonality in the business. I know these guys are seeing an uptick right now, and it's a great time because rates are still relatively low, and yet we are seeing more activity. And so, a lot of people ask me, hey, what is the best time of the year to buy or sell a house? And I think it just depends on your perspective, right? There's not necessarily ever a bad time. A lot of people want to know, hey, do I wait until, prices, until the market falls or goes down? And yet none of us can actually predict that, right? And so we don't ever know the bottom of the market is the bottom of the market until we're on the way back up. So there's no way to actually perfectly time the market. And so if you're looking at your different familial factors or interest rates or whatever is pertinent to your situation, you've got to make the best decision for you, and yet there's never really a bad time, right? We know that home ownership is the number one factor to building wealth in a family. And so, whether you've got kids or friends or whoever who are renters, I've had a conversation with a lot of people here recently who are getting off that fence, and they didn't necessarily want to buy, and yet they've started to realize they're literally flushing their money down the toilet by paying rent. So work with a lot of first-time home buyers, step-up buyers, sellers. We get asked what parts of Middle Tennessee do we cover. For better or worse, I'm everywhere from Columbia, Tennessee to Murfreesboro to Dixon to Lebanon to Portland, and everywhere in between. So we help people all over the mid-state, and as I mentioned earlier, if you've got people outside of the mid-state, so I send referrals all the time to Memphis and Chattanooga and Knoxville. However, our network also expands all over the United States, and additionally, believe it or not, outside of the U.S. So we've got some partners over in Europe and some partners in South Africa and different places as well. So regardless of, if you have a need here, or if you've got a family member out in Portland who, or Seattle, I think you had mentioned, who's got real estate needs, we can connect them with a great agent out there and go through that vetting process on your behalf so that you're, spending the time on the things that make you money and are important in your life. So that's really all I have. I just kind of wanted to walk y'all through how I got here, and what questions do y'all have for me about real estate and the market or anything like that?
So when you were a coach or whatever,
Yeah.
were you selling anything at that point, or
I
were you
was.
strictly just?
So I technically had a non-compete with my agent, so I only worked by referral. However, I was not actively what we call prospecting, right? So any business, whether it's Starbucks or it's a small business, you've got to prospect for a new business. Big companies just have large marketing departments and are able to do that, whereas in our line of work, it's a little bit more sweat equity.
I got you.
Yep.
I know a lot of advertisements like before you sell, get the intel, or there's a lot of people pushing for sellers to, talk to them first. So when you get approached by somebody, or for people in the room that don't know, what does that process look like for somebody that says, I just want to know what my home's worth before
it's
it listed?
Great question. So regardless if it's a seller or a buyer, by the way, the step one in the process is to get face to face and have a conversation and identify what are your goals and what are you hoping to achieve. Because quite honestly, if we're not a good fit, we're not going to like working together anyway, and I'm going to pump the brakes up front. But secondly, like if we can't actually achieve what you set out to, then there's no reason for us to even start the process. So I want to sit down with the seller and evaluate, okay, why are you selling the house? What's your motivation? Where are you going? When do you need to be there? If it's a buyer, okay, is your lease up? What's causing a change? Where do you need to get to? Some of those different factors to evaluate, how can we actually best help you? And so I'm trying to think, is there more to that you want me to dive into? It's really more of a needs analysis, if you will, and just understanding what is your situation and are we a good fit to make that happen? And if we're not, I'm going to be very transparent and upfront, because quite honestly, from a business owner perspective, it's not worth my time to run around with people who I can't help. It's just, it doesn't make sense. So referrals are the lifeblood of our business. Obviously we spend multiple hours a day picking up rocks and trying to find bugs underneath them and finding new leads and people to work with. However, what we do know in the real estate business and the world today is people do business with people that are one of three things. They like them, they know them, and they trust them, right? And so hopefully we want to be that trusted leader for you guys in the real estate industry that you like, that you know, and that you trust, that we're going to take great care of your friends and family as well.
In your professional opinion, where do you see we're at now? I mean, is it still a buyer's market? Is it still a seller's market? Where do you think we are?
So I think the long and short is it depends on the market. So real estate is hyper local, not just city. I'm talking neighborhood local. So when you hear big things like here's what's happening at the national scale, cool, and but throw it out the window. You need to concentrate on what's happening in Middle Tennessee. And so we're evaluating this day in and day out. In my professional opinion, I think we're kind of seeing that more level market. It's started to level out. As you mentioned earlier, I think prices are not as ridiculous as they were. and appraisers are, part of the reason for that. However, we've definitely seen an uptick, right? So, but with that said, uptick does not necessarily translate to what type of market it is. It just means there's more people in the pool. I'm open to feedback and discussion around it. I think it's a little more level than it has been.
I think so.
It has been. I think what I'm seeing is there's a lot of millennials that are qualifying in that $195,000
Yeah.
to $210,000 range, but not a lot of inventory.
Well,
Are you seeing
and
that?
that's going to be true though, and that's just so many people have built equity in Middle Tennessee. I mean, one really cool thing about Nashville historically was our cost of living was so low, and we had all these transplants from California and Chicago and New York and Florida who moved here, and they were making good money there, and they're able to buy really big properties here, right? And that was really cool because they could go further with their money. Now, the flip side of that equation is that locals here were frustrated, and you look at some of the gentrification in downtown communities, and some of those people are getting pushed out. Well, are they getting pushed out, or are they making that decision that it's best for their family? That's to be debated. And yet, because of kind of what we're seeing there, home values have risen, and so inventory in general, there's just not that many homes in that price point anymore. Quite frankly, I'm not sure we're ever going to get back to that. I think just the cost of living has gone up, unless you're just wanting to be on the outskirts. And I remember when I first got into business 5 years ago, I said, well, I'm never going to be selling property in White House in Portland. And now, like, everybody who can't afford Hendersonville or doesn't want to be in the city of Hendersonville, we're going further and further out. I mean, Ashland City, like, I've got some clients who just moved to Ashland City, and like, I've got people who want to go to Clarksville now.
Yeah.
I never thought people would want to live in Clarksville.
Yeah,
And
in Dixon.
yeah, Dixon's crazy. So, I mean, you look at, and again, I don't know exactly how far y'all travel for work and so forth, but like Thompson Station and Spring Hill were like blips on the map when I got into business, and now they're like putting up Chick-fil-A's and like really cool stuff, and people are freaking out. So it's kind of cool to have seen all of it, and yet I understand, like, depending on where you fall in that spectrum, it could be really cool or it could be really frustrating. So
I think Nashville's got a couple things going on. We got a really hot job market.
yeah,
The property values here haven't gotten ridiculous. Our taxes are still relatively low for a lot of these people that are moving here from up north or even out west. We're still one of the very few states that don't have a state income
yeah,
tax.
it's huge.
So people that retire in other places, when they move here, they actually get a raise, because they're not paying state income tax anymore. But the biggest issue with the affordable housing is the dirt is so expensive now. The land to develop, you can't buy the lots near as cheap as you could. So that first-time home buyer, $225,000 house is really hard to come by. It's almost gone, unfortunately.
And I think there's some out there, they're just not what people are accustomed to 225 getting them.
Right.
Right. That's like 1,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, to be honest though, like, I've got friends who live in DC and, major metros, and they still laugh at us. They're like,
Right.
oh my gosh, it's so cheap down there, right?
Yeah.
And yet people who have grown up here are saying, oh, I can't afford it anymore. And so it all just depends on your perspective, which is, it's funny.
They're paying $400,000 for it in DC, and we're paying like $250. So,
Yeah. Any other questions?
anybody else? Good job, man.
Cool. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.